I've got a secret to tell you. You can't tell anyone, especially not my boss. This is his car. It's a supercharged 968 Clubsport. And when I first drove it, I was a little bit underwhelmed. I'm going to tell you why, and also why I now absolutely love it. We're here in Germany. We were meant to drive on the ring. Unfortunately, we didn't quite make it, but we did make it to some gorgeous Black Forest L roads, which are Germany's equivalent of B roads. Anyway, I'll see you in the car.
If you like this video, you'll love our auction pack. Shooting Brake is run by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Check out our website for more information.
So my introduction to this car was in pretty ideal conditions. I was whizzing around Landau, which is a lovely circuit in South Wales. I had free reign to do what I want. And Landau is absolutely brilliant. It kind of resembles a road course, but you have the liberties of being able to go on track. You can hop curbs, you can take the apex, you don't need to worry about oncoming traffic. It's pretty much the ideal introduction to a raw sports car like this. And my expectations were very high. On paper, this is my kind of car. It's front engine, it's rear wheel drive, it's got a torquey, revvy, nice sounding engine. It's got a limited slip diff, and it weighs 1,320 kilograms, which in my books is pretty light. And I came away a little bit disappointed. The 968 on track was absolutely fantastic. It was so capable. And you could pretty much do what you wanted with it. You turn in, it turns. You brake, it brakes. You give it a throttle and it goes. There was no drama. It never stepped out. It never danced around underneath you. It didn't really come in on trail braking. And as a result, you never got the feeling that you were really dancing with the car. And when I look back on my favorite drives, you know, M3s, 911s, these are cars that you have to think quite a lot about. You have to manage oversteer, understeer, you have to manage the weight balance in them, you need to work hard to get them turned in. The 968 with this front mid-engine layout, transaxle rear, 49-51 weight distribution, all of that weight contained within the wheelbase, is a fantastic chassis, so capable. And the issue I found is that you just never really found the limits of the car, and when you did, it was so neutral, nothing ever really happened. And you just kind of interact with the controls and the car just goes, you don't really have to do anything. In that sense, it's actually quite a modern driving experience. It kind of resembles a all-wheel drive G82 BMW M4. It's just not a car that you have to manage that much. On top of that, I found the controls to be quite heavy, which is something I've personally never really been a fan of. And the whole car had a surprisingly heavy, weighty feel to it. Not in the way that it drove, but just in the way that it felt. And I can't say I disliked it, but I didn't fall in love with it. And I found that very interesting, that difference between the on-paper statistics and how a car actually feels in real life. We then pitched a trip to Nürburgring where Misha Chowdhury was meant to drive this car. I was meant to come in the SP support car, which is an E61 BMW M5, and my boss Amir, the owner of this car and the owner of Shooting Brake, was meant to drive this there. Unfortunately, Amir caught a really bad case of the flu, and the E61 did too, with a failed clutch and parts on backorder. So I ended up driving this with its wind-up windows, no aircon, no sunroof, reduced stereo, 7 hours all the way to the ring in the summer heat, which made me like this car even less. It was hot, buzzy, noisy, you couldn't hear the stereo, and it was generally just a pretty hardcore experience. Not bad by any means, it cruises really nicely at revs, but it didn't exactly enamor me to the car. But then we arrived on a hidden gem around the Nürburgring, which, I mean, obviously the ring itself is amazing, but the roads around the ring, these gorgeous L roads that cut through Germany's dense, flowing, hilly forests, are just incredible. They're smoothly paved, they've got these flowing, wide radius curves, and these constant undulations. And they've got this gorgeous flow to them that you don't necessarily find in the UK. UK B roads tend to be quite technical, and you have these short sprints to technical complexes, and you're between second, third, fourth, and you're working the cars quite hard. And I think that's why the UK has had such an affinity for small sports cars and hot hatches. Those are cars that come alive when you're driving them really, really hard. But these German roads, they're more flowing, they're more third to fourth, ping around in the mid-range, sitting around 60 miles an hour, and just keeping the car nice and happy. And it's over here in the car's home context that it all started to come alive. This is where the 968 Clubsport makes so much sense. This is where you realise what the engineers were trying to get to. See, this car is not one of those frivolous sports cars designed to give you pleasure through its controls like something like an SD1000. This car is a hardcore driving tool. It's a no-nonsense, stoic, engineering-led masterpiece of a car with a fantastically capable chassis, an agricultural but brilliantly precise and beautifully ratioed gearbox, gorgeously weighted steering, a perfect driving position, perfect visibility, perfect weight distribution, perfect size. It is a means of getting from one end of an L road to the other in the quickest, safest and most planted way possible, and it does that absolutely brilliantly. See, what this car allows you to do is enjoy the road beneath you to its fullest. It's a car that fades into the background, and that might sound underwhelming, but it's actually a fantastic thing, because when you're on a great road, it's the road that you really want to concentrate on. And a car that asks too much of you can sometimes get in the way. And what this does, it allows you to get into this flow. There's a sweet spot with this car. It's anywhere from around 50 to 80 miles an hour in third and fourth gear from 3,000 to 6,000 RPM. And you just ping around in the engine's sweet spot. And below that, round town, you know, doing 20, 30 miles an hour, it hates it. It just hates it. Especially the supercharged and lightweight flywheel. It doesn't want to cruise at speed. It's got savage engine braking. It's got savage acceleration. It's stiff with the MO30 suspension and the Bilstein shocks. The steering's super heavy. It's barely assisted. The clutch is ridiculously stiff. You're sitting low down. You can't move around that much. But when you find this flow, it doesn't necessarily come alive, but it just lightens underneath you. The steering becomes finger-like. The gearbox, which is heavy and agricultural at low speeds, turns finger light at speed when you just flick it through the ratios and you feel the drivetrain unload, and it helps the detents and the linkage just unload as well. And then you've got this front axle, which is just absolutely impervious to understeer. It's unbelievable. Even with 300 foot-pounds of torque and only 1320 kilos, that rear axle stays planted the whole time because you've got that gearbox sitting over it. It's not quite 911, but it's very similar. If you lift off, coming into a corner, the nose comes in. If you put your foot down, you'll get a tiny bit of understeer, but it will never step out on you. It's a very, very planted car, even with a supercharger. I can only imagine how planted and neutral and normal natural aspirated one is. I'd imagine actually it would actually feel quite underpowered to this, because this doesn't necessarily blow your socks off in terms of performance. It's just adequate to help you get down the road. And that's what it's all about. The visibility means you get this beautiful view of the countryside ahead of you. And what this car allows you to do, what this is an endurance racer. It's a cross-country endurance racer on back roads. If you've got a 2-3 hour drive along beautifully paved German L roads, going point to point, you've got a purpose in mind, you need to go buy some bananas or go buy some milk, this is the car to do it in. This is the car which you can drive quickly and safely down tight, twisting country lanes without getting tired, without getting fatigued, without having to push the car too hard. You just flick it around in third and fourth, steer it in with your fingertips, and get on your way. Let's just talk about this car in a bit more detail. So, the 968 Clubsport, I'm going to have to slow down for this because there's a lot to consider with this. The story of the 968 starts with the 924, which was Porsche's first transaxle sports car. What that means is you've got the engine at the front, longitudinally mounted, driving the rear wheels, but the gearbox is not here where it should be. It's actually underneath the boot floor, at the back, on the rear axle, and you've got a torque tube prop shaft driving that. You've got the clutch and flow at the back, you've got the linkage going to the back, and the gearbox sits over the rear wheels, integrated with the diff. And what that means is the weight is spread more evenly across the car, and it's easier to achieve a 49-51 weight distribution, which most people argue is the ideal weight distribution for performance. So Porsche made the 924, they gave it a fairly underwhelming engine. They then developed the 944, which was a development on that. It was wider, sleeker, bigger engine. And then there was a swan song, which was this. There's also the 928, but that's a different proposition entirely. But this is effectively a heavily facelifted 944. It's fairly rudimentary inside. There's not really a lot of tech or design that goes on here. It kind of reminds me of a Mark 1 Golf, just stretched out into a sports car. That is no bad thing. It feels super robust. It's a really nice thing to be in. It's got that heavy pre-VW Porsche feeling. But the issue with the 968 with this massive 3-litre 4-cylinder engine is that it just didn't sell very well. It didn't represent bang for buck at the time in terms of performance. You could get an E36 M3, which had way more performance for the money. You could get all sorts of things at the time in the mid-90s, and they just didn't sell very many of them. To remedy that, Porsche released the Clubsport, which was a paired back version, but the difference is, compared to modern paired back sports cars, the Clubsport was actually cheaper than the normal 968. And the other thing is, the Clubsport was meant to be a paired back car, but you could actually spec in all of the deleted options back into the car. So you could get one with electric windows, a sunroof, thicker glass, normal seats, etc. So to get a proper Clubsport like this, which has thinner glass, wind-up windows, no sunroof, no aircon, no central locking, less speakers, thinner glass, no rear wiper, no electric boot release, which is frankly really annoying, and various other little bits and bobs. And all of that weight saving adds up to about 100 kilos, making this 1,320 kilograms, which is, in my opinion, a very decent weight for a car of this size with a proper tin top roof. As standard, they have about 240 horsepower from that 3-litre 4-cylinder engine. This one with a supercharger from 9 Excellence develops about 300 horsepower, and it's also had a limited step diff fitted. I think you could get them as an option on these, but this one has one fitted in the aftermarket. The result is the kind of performance that these cars should have had as standard. I reckon Porsche muted the 968 a little bit to not overthrow the 911. It's a much better chassis than the 911, much more capable, and they didn't want to outdo that car with the performance of this one. So the question I had after driving this car on track and feeling a little bit underwhelmed with it was, what's the point of getting a Clubsport pack and dealing with the compromise of wind-up windows, no aircon, etc., etc., if it's not a flat-out 10/10 machine? Surely, for what is effectively a cross-country GT, you want the increased comfort and you don't mind the extra weight. But the thing is, the Clubsport does make sense on the road, and I'll tell you why. To find that sense of flow, it comes from two things. One is the way all the controls lighten up when you find that sense of flow. That's a beautiful feeling, but that feeling also comes from the fact that you're able to use this control so delicately. You're able to just tickle the throttle. You're just able to kiss the brakes. And you just flick through the gears and you dance around the steering or just get in the car turned, and you never have to wrestle it around, and there's real satisfaction for that. It makes it a really relaxing drive. On top of that, it just gives that front axle a better chance of getting the car turned in, which means you don't need to use the controls as much to get the car down the road. It's just a cool thing to be in, it's a cool thing to have. It's a piece of Porsche history. Their last proper front engine rear-wheel drive sports car. Their decision to not continue with this platform was a marketing and sales decision. It wasn't an engineering decision. This is an absolutely beautiful chassis that, in my opinion, probably deserved a much more exciting powertrain, and it didn't get it purely due to being counters and marketing people. So the 968 is a car to be celebrated. It's a vision of what Porsche could have continued with. And by taking one and modifying it and tickling it a little bit with a supercharger, lightweight flywheel, and some better suspension, it allows you to complete that vision that Porsche probably originally had for this chassis. It's an absolutely fantastic car, and it really does have its place in history and its place in the lexicon of enthusiast sports cars. It's a car for people who truly enjoy the art of road driving, the art of navigating down a country lane as smoothly and as quickly as possible. This is a car for people who enjoy beating their Google Maps ETA. It's a car for people who enjoy the real work of road driving. They don't mind getting a bit sweaty. They don't mind winding down window when they get a bit hot. They don't mind the vibrations and noise from a lightweight flywheel, the fact there's a bit of texture around town. This is for people who are addicted to the flow of a proper winding forest country road. I'm one of those people, and I love this car. I absolutely love it. I didn't before, but when you bring it to this home environment here in the German forest, it's absolutely brilliant. It's a tool, it's a no-nonsense tool for proper drivers, and I just absolutely love that. And to be frank, you just wouldn't get something that's made today. This one's not for sale on Shooting Brake. It's one of my boss's favourite cars. I think he's keeping holding it for a long time. But if you do have something similar that you'd like to sell with us, do get in touch. We're always on the lookout for new stock. Be it a sports car, a classic car, modern classic, interesting 4x4s, you name it, we will sell it. Shooting Brake is an auction platform run for enthusiasts, by enthusiasts. We've got bespoke marketing packages for every car that we sell. and we've got some very, very competitive buyer's fees.
By the end of the trip, I had a hate-love relationship with this 968 Clubsport. A stubbornly single-minded car, it was fantastic in its comfort zone and truly awful outside of it. I'm no shrinking violet when it comes to cars, having daily driven my fair share of bucket seat clad, coilovered, welded diff-equipped drift cars, but I've yet to experience a tin-top car less adept at day-to-day driving than this 968. Despite that, the special, days gone by feel of the car combined with that magical sense of flow makes it a bona fide classic in my books. The 968 is alright indeed. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the car, and if you happen to enjoy this video, please do subscribe. My name's Galeb, you're watching Shooting Brake, and we'll see you next time.